Chris, my man.
Kind of weird to see me here on a Tuesday.
Well, and I'm thinking I've had like last week there was a couple of firsts for me. Like I know you had other things going on, obligations last week, so I jumped on with Levi. That was
Right.
a first, right? And now I get to hang out with you. So this is pretty awesome. I love it.
There you go. You got one with Levi and one with me. That'd be
Yeah.
look at you're with the youth pastors. I don't know. I guess I don't want to talk that stuff too much, but we always joke about Wednesday is the best day because you get the youth pastor takeovers.
I know. I felt like I was really well. I said last week, if people jumped on, they're like, "Oh no, what happened to Chris?"
Yeah.
But I love it. You guys are
Nothing.
love.
So nothing bad happened. It was like home stuff, preschool with my little daughter and things like it just all the shifting happened all at once. I'm like, I gotta go home to be with my kids. And the 714 still needs to happen. So that's all it was.
Yeah. I mean, nothing blew up, nothing burned down. I think
Oh, I just had to be a dad. So that
yeah,
was actually a good part of my day.
that's awesome. Priority, right? Number
Right.
one.
Yeah. All
Well,
right.
so it sounded like yesterday finished up in Esther 4, right?
I
So
believe so. I've been slacking and have not watched religiously like I used to. So I missed it. But I was told they finished at 4. So we're gonna start with 5 and hope for the best.
I think that sounds good. I think that sounds awesome. I can read if you want.
Yeah. Why don't we really quick?
Yeah.
I want to give a basic outline for anyone who's tuned in today and missed it. Esther is a story best read all the way through, but we'll just give you from the beginning. This king, not a good king, like he was a worldly king. He wanted to parade his wife in front of his friends because she was so beautiful, and she refused. So he kicked her out of being a queen. Then he started a beauty pageant to find a new queen. And Esther is a Jew who was brought in because of her beauty, and she did end up finding favor. And so the king ultimately chose her to be the queen. Then enters this plot to kill the Jews because this guy named Haman, right? Is that how you say it? Haman? Uh-oh. So Haman comes in and with this whole plot going on, Mordecai is a good guy who then comes in and says, hey, Queen Esther, we need your help or the Jews are going to die. And she's like, I don't know. I might die if I try to do something. And then my favorite verse, maybe you were created for such a time as this. So you are probably queen for this moment. And so then a plan is hatched. Queen Esther's like, all right, I want to do something. We'll see if it works. We're going to try to fix the problem because once it was written down by the king and stamped, it couldn't be changed. And it was like, on this day of the year, everyone's going to go out and slaughter as many Jews as possible. And that was the law. And so now we enter into the rest of the story. Let's see what happens next. Is that a good explanation? Did I miss anything?
No, I think that's awesome. And we constantly see these like little traps, right, that are setting. They go to the king and puff up his pride and say, oh, we saw it in Daniel and we're seeing it here. And man, the enemy doesn't have to try very hard because our flesh is already prone to just following paths of unrighteousness. And so you see this plot, and let's see what happens here in Esther chapter 5, verse 1. Now on the third day, Esther dressed in her royal clothing and stood in the inner courtyard of the palace facing it. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the royal courtroom facing its entrance. As soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the courtyard, she gained favor in his eyes. The king extended the gold scepter in his hand toward Esther, and she approached and touched the tip of the scepter. What is it, Queen Esther? The king asked her. Whatever you want, even to half the kingdom will be given to you. Now, if it pleases the king, Esther replied, may the king and Haman come today to the banquet I have prepared for them. The king said, hurry and get Haman so we can do as Esther has requested. So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. Now, while drinking the wine, the king asked Esther, whatever you ask will be given to you. Whatever you want, even to half the kingdom, will be done. Esther answered, "This is my petition and my request. If I have found favor in the eyes of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and perform my request, may the king and Haman come to the banquet I will prepare for them. Tomorrow I will do what the king has asked."
All right, let's
On that
go.
day, oh yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So again, a little background. Maybe you guys who did listen to yesterday, a recap. If she shows up at the king's gates and the king's like, he can like, why are you here? Oh, off with your head, you're dead right there. But if he extends the scepter, he's saying, come, and then you go up and touch the scepter as a act of submission. And then the king will say, okay, what is it you request? So there's a lot of this pomp and circumstance. And again, puffing the king up, making it something big, but man, right there. And this is where the plot thickens. Like, it's so cool. And I'm wondering why there's two banquets. Maybe we can hash that out a little bit, but I'm thinking Queen Esther's like trying to be careful because she knows the law is already made and you can't really take back a law. And she also knows that Haman is a problem, but the king kind of likes Haman. So she's like, maybe the banquet went well, but she just wanted, let me wait one more day because she wasn't sure. This is just, what do you think about this story? Because it's kind of cool.
I mean, such a human drama, right? Because we're seeing, I love how they paint the picture there that, she's dressed in her royal clothing. So this is like very, top-notch formality here. She's going to approach the king. As you just pointed out, this was serious because it could mean her death. And she actually told Mordecai that, like, this is what can happen to somebody if they go uninvited. And he hasn't asked for me in a month. So for me just to show up, how do I know he's not going to kill me? And then so she shows up, and it's the inner courtyard of the palace, right? And the king is in his royal throne in the royal courtroom. Like, it's just all this royalty. He's sitting on high. That had to have been terrifying for her. She's already in this place where they're based on, I'm going to pick her because she's beautiful. Probably doesn't even know her that well. No real investment there. And so, she probably doesn't know the king that well, to be honest. She knows who he is, obviously, and they've probably been intimate at that point, but not like a real relationship. He's had women before. So here she is in that situation. And I agree, Chris. I think you're right, where she's like trying to feel it out, see how the king is responding and reacting, see if Haman is not aware of what's going on. She could be afraid that maybe he's kind of onto her, like what she's planning. He's obviously extremely high up. The king has appointed him above all the officials and everything. So I know in my I would be very cautious. I would be like extremely slow and like, is this really going to work? Or maybe not trusting God, but I think she is, because at least in a process of trusting God, he's working in Esther, just like he is all the people in the situation. So he's getting her to trust him, just like he's working in Mordecai and the king. We're going to see some things as the story goes on in the coming days, how the king's going to respond and what is going to happen there. So
and so in all that, we also have this, like, this book is actually a debated book among some biblical scholars because God isn't exactly mentioned throughout it. Like, it's kind of a story that's just told. And so there are some scholars who think this book doesn't belong in the Bible, but we can clearly see God throughout the story, which is why I argue it belongs there. Plus, there is this side, like, you can see the gospel throughout it. It's kind of like spread and scattered, but you can definitely see it. And this part right here, you're just kind of seeing some cool things that are happening. And I'm in all of the kings of the Bible, especially like right here. It's like, ask me anything, I'll give you up to half the kingdom. Like, bro, we all know that was like an exaggeration. Come on, like, what are you really doing here? And I don't know. I think maybe that was like a saying that they said, because I know it said somewhere else in the Bible too. But it's just like, this whole thing is set up in such a way that I think the king he's just in one of his good moods that day, probably the same mood he was in when he said, "Hey, I want my queen to come out and show her beauty amongst my friends." Like, it's just one of those weird things. And yeah, this is where things get a little interesting, because again, the enemy's there, and the next part kind of gets interesting too. So I really wish we could read 6, but that'll be for somebody else. We finish 5.
Yeah.
So why don't we get to that part?
Sounds good. So picking up in chapter 5, verse 9 of Esther, that day Haman left full of joy and in good spirits. But when Haman saw Mordecai at the king's gate, and Mordecai didn't rise or tremble in fear at his presence, Haman was filled with rage toward Mordecai. Yet Haman controlled himself and went home. He sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh to join him. Then Haman described for them his glorious wealth and his many sons. He told them all how the king had honored him and promoted him in rank over all the other officials and the royal staff. What's more, Haman added, Queen Esther invited no one but me to join the king at the banquet she had prepared. I am invited again tomorrow to join her with the king. Still, none of this satisfies me, since I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate all the time. His wife Zeresh and all his friends told him, have them build a gallows 75 feet tall. Ask the king in the morning to hang Mordecai on it. Then go to the banquet with the king and enjoy yourself. The advice pleased Haman, so he had the gallows constructed.
Yep.
Oh my goodness.
Probably worked all night on that. Like,
I'm 75 feet tall is extremely tall. And they would have to have some massive support for even just a single, gallow like that. I'm like, yeah, they must have worked.
2-story building, like 25 feet.
Yeah. Something like that. It's
like a 6-story building right there.
I mean,
put somebody up there. Like, what do you?
they have to build a ladder just to get to the gallows. So they're probably working.
I'm guessing a scaffolding all the way up, and so then you have to walk. That's a long walk all the way up. Like, you're going to drag somebody all the way up these steps, all the way to the top.
Oh my gosh!
And you want the whole town to see it. That's why you build it that tall.
Right. It's kind of that same. I mean, in a different scenario, of course, but that mentality of the Tower of Babel, like just all this glory. I mean, when Haman was called his friends, I just almost started laughing. Like he's called his friends and his wives just so he can brag about what he's got. But then, poor Haman, he's so frustrated though, because every time he sees Mordecai, he gets upset. And it's like, but I think look at who he's surrounded by too. His friends are like, build a gallows and hang him in the morning, and his wife and he's just so. It's just the epitome of our pride and what it can do to us.
There we go. Yeah.
Our human condition.
So Haman, fun fact I learned was that when this story is read, even to this day, Jews, when they read this story, whenever Haman's name is said, the whole crowd's like, like Haman. Yeah. And can you imagine as the story is read? It's probably fun for the kids too. Every time his name is said, and here you hear like Haman's name like 5 times in a row. It's like
a lot of clear.
So, but the problem is, we were all Hamans before Jesus. Like, your pride gets in the way. This is one of the things I remember about myself, is that I really wasn't like a horrible guy. I thought I was a pretty good guy before I like fully followed Jesus, but my pride was there, and nothing was ever enough. I was never satisfied. I was never, what's that fun word we use? I learned dang it. Contentment. There we go.
Oh, contentment.
That was a fun word just to try to study. But how do you be content with what you have? Not looking at your neighbor with some jealousy, like, I wish I had what they had. Like, here's Haman, top of the top. In his mind, he doesn't even realize it, but he's being blessed by a banquet with the queen. He does have a lot of friends. He was just honored not too long ago by the king. Like, there's so much here that he should be you know what? I don't care about that Mordecai guy. Like, he's nothing compared to me. But no, his whole day is ruined. Everything's ruined. Doesn't even matter what's going on in his life. Haman is alive, and Haman doesn't like him.
Yeah.
So everybody else likes me, but Haman doesn't. So now everything's nothing. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Like, it sounds silly, but I remember, like, that one thing could ruin everything for me. And then you look at Mordecai, the complete opposite. Mordecai knows Haman wants to kill them. He knows that more than likely, if Esther can't do anything, the Jewish population is going to be diminished quite a bit. And what's Mordecai doing? Sitting at the gate, doesn't rise and try to please Haman, but also doesn't tremble. He's not afraid. He just probably looks at him with like, oh, there's Haman, and just goes back to whatever he's doing. Like, that is a God thing right there, in all honesty. Like, it doesn't say he's being a jerk. He doesn't say he's being cocky. He's just like, when you have God and you're focused on that, and you know the promises of God, you know what God's done in the past, you know the Old Testament stories that we read about where God showed up, not much shakes you. And you become content. You're okay. Like, I'm all right. I don't need your approval. What a difference.
Oh yeah. That's so good, because our foundation says it all. We're going to live our lives based on whether we're standing on God and his word, or whether we're on our own, understanding, and that shifting sand that Jesus talked about, right? That the man who builds his house on the rock, which is him and his word, can stand through anything. So this storm, so to speak, that's coming at Mordecai and the Jewish people in the form of Haman and going to slaughter them, he's not afraid of it, because he knows the Lord and what he's done for his people. And we talked a little bit about Haman and being a descendant of Amalek, and just that hatred between these people groups, who all the way back to Jacob and Esau, how that just continued on. And they didn't seek to break that cycle. They didn't look at the sin that they were in and repent before the living God and break that. And so we just continue to see those things played out time and time again, generation after generation, of discontentment and hatred and all of this abuse and all of this that Jesus can free us from. And if we don't turn to him, it can grow into something horrific. I think that's why these stories resonate so much, because we're just seeing, as you pointed out, Chris, the human condition. We're just seeing that sometimes on these grand scales of like entire nations and entire people groups. Yeah. But it's really the same things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Oh yeah, constantly. Yeah. And we get in our own way. And we know there's spiritual battles going on. I mean, as soon as the church starts to do something cool and we start heading in the right direction, I know you see it with me, like the spiritual attacks on the staff and on some of our key volunteers. And people get upset about things that make no sense. It's like, oh, we're doing something good because we're getting stuff's coming out of left field. And so we know we're being attacked. And it's just like, it's not really the people we're fighting. But like what you said, like, it's so easy for the enemy to attack you when what's your foundation? What are you worshiping even? Like, you can't have two masters. You can't worship money and God. You can't worship your house and God. You can't worship two things. If you're chasing after something so hard that's not God, it's so easy for the enemy to get you, or to at least keep you distracted from what's most important. And Mordecai here, what is he doing? He's not plotting to try to fix it. He's not trying to plan to kill Haman. Mordecai is sitting at the gate, probably still in his clothes that are his what do you call those, the mourning,
the sackcloth?
Sackcloth. He's probably still sitting in those, seeking God. Actually, I think there was a moment when Esther asked them to pray and fast for me. So maybe that's what he's doing. He's sitting there praying and fasting. So he's connected to God. And there's another connection I love. Like, what is Mordecai like when he's connected to God? Just still, just calm.
Yeah.
It doesn't say anything. He doesn't do anything. He's just there and he's good. like not even trembling. I love those words. Like he didn't even tremble before Haman.
Yeah.
And what's Haman like? He's built on the pomp and circumstance. It's probably not even the money or anything. He just likes to be noticed. He's on a pedestal, and so that's what he wants. But this guy won't put him on a pedestal. So that's what matters most to him. And it all comes crumbling down here soon.
Yeah. I'm really glad you pointed out a little bit ago about how this book doesn't mention God, the word Elohim, that there's that God's here, but yet, just like you said, we're seeing him work all through this. Because I look at Esther, just take Esther and Haman for a minute. Both of these have been elevated to great status. I mean, Esther was made queen for her beauty and all of this stuff. She has some, position there in this kingdom. And of course, Haman being promoted like he was. But yet two different approaches. Obviously, she's afraid of being killed, but she's also willing to put her life on the line to protect her people. If she has a chance to do that, she's going to. Whereas Haman is concerned about himself, number one. That's all he cares about. And thus, we see the drama start to unfold. But I am just so convinced that
even the plot from the beginning, Haman wants to kill the Jews because Mordecai won't bow down to him. That's it.
Yeah. Like, one little offense and it just blows up.
Yeah. If Mordecai killed your kid, I understand your anger, but he just won't bow down to you. And why? Because they're Jews, and Jews don't bow down to people. They only are going to bow down to God. That's it. Mm-hmm. That's the way it is. That's the way they had been forever. They're not mean about it.
Yeah. Like go back to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They wouldn't bow. And what does King Nebuchadnezzar do? Throw them in the furnace, just this outrage. And we know that's a fruit of the flesh, or a work of the flesh, versus the spirit, the fruit that comes from having him indwelling us, right? That peace and that gentleness. And it's just such a great barometer to see these stories and then look at our own lives and go, you know what, that is something I deal with. I mean, I don't go killing a bunch of people, but man, I get so frustrated sometimes when the littlest thing happens. Or I find that peace. And so I know, okay, my relationship with God, there's some connection there. And he allows that to be there for us to see kind of where we're at,
Man,
right?
There you go, a barometer. Mm-hmm. I'm stealing that today. There you go. It's one of your check engine lights if you like that better. Mm-hmm. But how are you reacting to things? And sometimes you've been connected and then all of a sudden you're having a bad day. That might be a spiritual attack and you just need to, I don't know where that came from, but I need to fix that. Mm-hmm. But if you're like constantly easily offended, or you feel like people are always against you, more than likely you have not been connecting to God, or maybe you haven't had any rest lately where God kind of commands us to have rest, day of rest. And so some of that, like, we just need to come back to some of those basics. And I feel like you will see yourself become more like Mordecai, more, all right, let's go with what happens next. Let's do what's right. Let's just let God be God. And the other stuff just rolls off. Somebody's mad at you. I'm sorry you're mad at me. Can I pray for you? Like, roll right off. It's fine. Like, if I offended, I'm sorry. I don't mean to offend. Let me help.
Right. Yeah. I mean, here Mordecai and them, they didn't do anything wrong in the true sense of, wrong and right. But in his eyes, it was wrong because it was a decree made, right? So going and looking at how God establishes truth and order and stability versus the way the world sees that, it will put us at odds with the world if we follow God. This is an extreme case, but we know that still goes on today, even. I mean, it's a fact. We don't experience that here in this country that we live in. Our persecution looks very different and is much, I would say, on the mild side. But nonetheless, spiritual attacks is just as intense, no matter where you live, no matter what side of the globe you live on. Spiritual attacks are very real. Though we don't see national persecution here, I've seen marriages torn asunder. I've seen hopelessness. People go through their lives. I've seen just the same what we're talking about here, attitudes of, you just cannot seem to find peace and sanctity and stability in your life, and you're just tossed, and so you turn to alcohol or drug abuse, or maybe an illegitimate relationship, whatever it is. If you're turning to those things, then you don't have a relationship with God. You might think you do, but your relationship is strained extremely. And he's saying, look, I'm giving you these warning signs. You're seeing that you're not like Mordecai. He was stable. He knew God was in control. I think that's something to really consider, instead of just turning more and more to those things. Instead of trusting in those things, go to God. And if you don't know how to do that, just say, I need help. Yeah. That there is a God. I need help. And he hears you. He understands in ways that we will never fathom. We can never fathom how much he understands our hurt and our pain and what we go through. But he does. We see it over and over and over again.
Yeah. And I love that you brought that back. Yeah. So 714 people out there, if you're maybe you're feeling like you're connected to God, and you're here, you're with 714. So you're obviously trying to connect to him. Maybe this is a message that you can just save for someone else, and pray to God, ask him to help you share it with them. That somebody if they're struggling so bad, they just need to connect with God more. And you can be that kind, loving voice that helps them. But the question that you made me think of, I always love asking this question to people, is what does Jesus mean when he says his yoke is easy and his burden is light? If it's easy and light, why do I see so many Christians walking around with heavy burdens and heavy yokes, working so hard? Like, yeah, we should be hard workers, but it shouldn't feel like weight. It shouldn't feel so heavy. Something's off. And so maybe we're just not hooked up to the one who makes it light and easy. I don't know. That's my thought for the day.
Yeah. If we're finding our confidence in the things that Haman did, what people say about us, what we have to show, the things, that's always going to be a tripping hazard for us. God in his word reminds us and cautions us and warns us that, like you just said a little bit ago, if you you can't serve God money, you can't serve your position at work, or you can't, if you're loving even your spouse, if you're loving your spouse more than God, those are all ways that the enemy can get in very easily to really, really disrupt our lives. And we tend to beat ourselves up too. Our flesh, we're very good at that. Like, I can't do this right. Why even try at all? Mm-hmm. Right. And that's not God's attitude either. He, like you just said, Chris, I love that you brought that up in that scripture, that Jesus said that my yoke is easy. I am here to actually walk with you through this. I'm not just telling you what to do and you go do it. Like, I am with you, because his love is so great for us. And that is such an encouragement. We're never going to be perfect this side of eternity, but that's not the point. God's grace and his goodness toward us is that he loves us and continues to he desires to pour into us over and over and over again. So don't beat yourself up, and don't trust in those things either, right? Just look at God and say, what is it that I am holding above you in status? What am I holding on to in this life that is greater to me than you right now? And Father, help me to let go of that. Help me to give that to you, whatever it is or whoever it is, and he will honor that. It's what he desires.
We have some homework today. So anything that maybe even you're putting too much focus on lately that's getting you away from God. And search for it. What's getting in the way of you being in peace and contentment? What's getting in the way of you following God fully? Like anything like that. Yeah. And maybe it is time to just get on your knees and say, God, take this from me. It's not good for me. So, and I think we're out of time. We might be over. I'm not sure.
Uh-oh.
So,
good stuff though, man. Good stuff.
You read, so I'll pray. You go with that?
Sounds good.
Do you have any closing comments before I pray?
No, I think you closed it beautifully.
Okay, here we go. Oh, Father, you you are so amazing. Just to see how you orchestrate things, Lord, I thank you that you're working things out behind the scenes all the time for those who love you. And I ask you, help us to see that, give us eyes to see it, so that it's easier for us to trust you and just go with whatever you're doing. Let us work beside you. Let you take the lead and search our hearts, oh God. Find anything in us that's taking us away from you or causing us to sin, and help us to get rid of it so that we can just enjoy the joy of living a life fully surrendered to you. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Well, Chris, thanks for letting me hang out with you today. And
It was good.
yeah, love it.
There's some surprises in Esther I wasn't expecting, so that was good.
Yeah, I love going back through these books that we can be very familiar with, right? But that's like, oh my goodness, there's a lot of stuff that I never paid attention to. But
And so I'm excited about tomorrow. Tune in for tomorrow, because that's like I don't know, I say this too many times. It's one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. Like the whole Bible is my favorite chapter. No, tomorrow really is one of my favorite chapters when it comes to Esther and how it all plays out. What God does is just so amazing, and it plays out like a drama. I would watch this movie over and over. It's so good. So, all right. Anyways, see you guys tomorrow.